Hello and welcome to my presentation of Learning from the Circle, Reconnecting with Indigenous Knowledge for EDUC 5031, Curriculum Teaching and Learning. Prior to being a TRU student, I hadn't received any formal education surrounding Indigenous knowledge, and it was really just self-taught, and I felt that it didn't serve Indigenous philosophy accurately or authentically. When the 94 calls to action were issued by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada in 2015, the landscape and expectation of teaching changed, and with curriculum rewrites and Indigenous learning embedded in our curriculum, teachers, in my experience, were met with the challenge of unlearning the past while simultaneously creating a path towards reconciliation with really no training. So the nature of my project is to identify a gap I faced in my own learning of Indigenous knowledge. My theoretical framework for the workshops is guided on the work of Dewey, Freire, and Noddings. Each have had an impact on my philosophy of teaching and align with my beliefs and values towards teaching. Exploring different lenses in this course highlighted the empathy I have towards the diverse students in our schools and communities, and I wanted to approach my sessions from an Indigenous lens, as I felt there's a clear intersection with multicultural education. I believe that from an Indigenous lens, we can address students, staff, and community members from all backgrounds in a way that is respectful to their beliefs and values. So Dewey relied on experiential learning to approach curriculum, and he used those experiences to direct our learning. He believed that education must begin with a psychological insight into the child's capacities, interests, and habits. Flinders, page 34, 2021. As I approach each session, I will engage with participants to determine their scaffolded knowledge and then respond accordingly as we explore Indigenous education. We will physically interact with our environment as we learn about Indigenous ways of knowing. And as a naturalist, Dewey also believed that the prolonged interaction with the environment leads to the birth of culture. Along with Dewey's approach of experiential learning, Freire was an advocate for problem-posing education, which places individuals at the center of learning. And he really encouraged his educators to learn alongside their students and from their students. He believed that engaging in dialogue with the oppressor and the oppressed was the only way to liberate the oppressed. And throughout the sessions, we will learn from each other and share our knowledge and experiences and engage in a dialogue that allows us to critically reflect on our own practice. I think this is a vital component when we consider Indigenous learning and our role in reconciliation. Similarly, Noddings shares that as we engage our students in dialogue, we learn about their needs, working habits, interests, and talents. And this dialogue between students and colleagues is essential to continued growth and learning and will be vital to guiding our conscientization. So facilitating the workshop from an ethics of care will also encourage participants to learn and participate authentically with a reflective lens. I also hope to incorporate my philosophies from an ethical space, and I want people with differing worldviews to be able to interact respectfully with one another so that they can share their thoughts, feelings, and frustrations and reflections without judgment or discrimination. As a second generation immigrant to Canada, considerations for others' cultures, traditions, beliefs, and values really impacts how I interact with others. And throughout the sessions, I want to approach and convey to participants a lens of Ubuntu, which translated means I am because we are. And it really highlights the significance that to become fully human, we have to know where we came from and be in community with others in order for change to happen. And I love this quote. Ubuntu comes into its own because it signifies the interconnectedness of all life, whilst affirming the importance of human to human relationships as a microcosm of relatedness of all things in the cosmos, embodying how we ought to relate to the other, what our moral obligation is towards the other. Ubuntu really just sees people for who they are, and it strives to create freedom for everyone with this respect for land and nature's influence on who we are. And I think it's an ideology that really intersects with Indigenous philosophy. Oral storytelling will be a focus throughout the curricular unit. Robert Matthews said anything worth learning can be told in a story. And this is vital to Indigenous learning, and it will be a lens that we focus on throughout our sessions. Whereas Western cultures often view storytelling as an activity to entertain small children, in Indigenous pedagogy, it is a central tool for teaching and learning. Majidi and Rastul, page 86, 2008. I think this will create empathy and is a great source of knowledge for participants. The First People's Principles of Learning looks at learning holistically and really encompasses facets of learning that ultimately support the well-being of the self, the family, the community, the land, the spirits, and the ancestors. And I look forward to incorporating these principles throughout the sessions. Curricular unit details. So, Indigenous ideology is a part of my teaching practice that I need to respond to in a way that acknowledges the past, educates the present, and addresses my role in reconciliation. Throughout obtaining higher education this past year, my philosophy of education has been deeply impacted and enhanced by the Indigenous learning I've received. And I believe that this learning is essential for educators and leaders and community members to move forward in their own reconciliation journeys. So the methodology is based on the First People's Principles of Learning, and that will really lay the foundation for how I approach the curriculum. The content is a series of 5 professional development workshops that are geared towards adults. To further their understanding of Indigenous knowledge. And it can be a standalone session, or it can be taken as part of a series. The materials required are very minimal. There's a lot of discussion involved and a lot of oral stories. The assessment is based on reflection, discussion, and really how participants can take their learning and apply it in their classrooms. My deep hope for the curricular project is that participants leave the workshops feeling reflective of their practice and able to implement concrete strategies in approaching their own teaching and learning from an Indigenous lens. The scope and sequence. The intent of the workshop is to provide an understanding of Indigenous knowledge. Each session offers a different foundation of Indigenous knowledge and learning, and it's built to gain a deeper understanding. The first session begins with an introduction to Indigenous ways of knowing, and from there we build upon Indigenous philosophy, connectedness to the land, understanding our own biases, and fostering effective relationships with Indigenous communities. Each session will take about 1.5 to 2 hours to complete and is a professional development style model for educators, administrators, educational assistants, curriculum designers, diversity and inclusion officers, and community members. Though it's not specifically designed for students, I believe that there's lots of practical applications that participants could implement with their students to understand learning from an Indigenous lens with minimal modifications. As participants engage in the sessions, they will be introduced to different aspects of Indigenous culture, knowledge, and traditions. The development of the scope and sequence was used in conjunction with the website Walking Together from New Learn Alberta, and there are other suggested resources outlined in detail in the curricular plan. The first session here focuses on an introduction to Indigenous ways of knowing. First and foremost, in each session, I will create and explain ethical space so that participants can explore their knowledge from a non-judgmental place. The focus of this session is to understand the importance of having foundational knowledge in Indigenous epistemology. At the end of each session, I've also included additional resources that would be helpful for a facilitator for each session. From those resources, there are additional activities, information, and fact sheets that pertain to the session title. Session 2 looks at exploring and understanding Indigenous philosophy through storytelling. We will explore Indigenous philosophy and gain an appreciation for storytelling, and we will address the quote by Robert Matthew, "Anything worth learning can be put into a story," and that is how we've learned for thousands of years. Session 3 is what I based my lesson plan on, and it is exploring the interconnectedness to the land. So in this session, participants will explore the interconnected lens of Indigenous knowledge, its connectedness to Mother Earth, and the significance of a circle in Indigenous knowledge. We explore the connection to the land, language, and culture through reading, and we will examine and explore place-based and experiential learning through a photo activity. Session 4 is about identifying our own biases and our microaggressions to understand how our personal thoughts and feelings really impact our practice and interactions with the diverse communities in our school populations. Lastly, we will look at fostering and building relationships with Indigenous communities. Participants will have the opportunity here to engage in an Indigenous practice led by an elder, and we will learn how to foster the relationships and build relationships with Indigenous communities, the protocols for working alongside elders, and connecting to Native friendship societies within our communities. I've also included the guidelines for working with elders in this session as an additional resource. This is my lesson plan. I've laid it out in slides as if I was presenting to an audience of participants. I would begin my lesson plan with my objectives of knowing, doing, and feeling. So the knowing portion would be that participants would develop knowledge around Indigenous philosophy and the connection to the land. The doing part would incorporate drawing and creating a land acknowledgement, collaborating with others, reflecting on personal feelings, engaging in talking circles, and creating a photo story. And the feeling part would be based on participants reflecting on their own thoughts and feelings throughout the session. I would begin the lesson with this slide and this quote, and we would explore just our feelings and thoughts around this quote. And then we would move into my deep hope for the workshop, which is that the participants leave the workshop feeling reflective of their practice and able to implement concrete strategies in approaching their own teaching and learning from an Indigenous lens. From here would be the start of our land acknowledgement, just a reflection, and I would encourage participants to relax, close their eyes, take a calming breath, and just think of a place that is special to them from when they were young, a young child. And these are some guiding, reflecting questions to help them discover this place. From there, we would discuss the place that they chose. Their goal is to draw that place on a piece of paper, and we would discuss it. And then from there, I would give the formal land acknowledgement, and I chose to do this not at the beginning of my presentation, but specifically here so that participants could engage in their own land acknowledgement with their own language. I would share an example of the land acknowledgement that I would use in my current context as a grade 1 teacher. From there, we look at identity and how Indigenous philosophy relies on the land to incorporate their identity. And we would watch this video with Dwayne Donald, just a few minutes of it, and discuss how the land has shaped his identity. We would take a quick break then, and then return to discuss the article that we read in our class from Alukajuk and Ramsmason about my father was told to talk to the environment first before anything else. We would discuss and reflect on their interaction with the land and how it created a language for them. Finally, we would reach our experiential part of the lesson where we would actually create a photo voice activity. And this is based on a lesson called Connection to the Land from the Walking Together website. These are my personal photos that I would show participants and create my story from these pictures. Participants would then go outside and engage in the activity, and then we would come back and share our photo stories. I would end the lesson here with really just a reflection on how what they learned impacts their practice and how they can encourage students to explore their own connections to the land. And this is just really a reflection piece and a discussion if participants are open to sharing. The following slides are my lesson plan in detail. They include all the resources and detailed information. All the materials needed, some fact sheets, and a guided sharing circle that I think is really neat. Just leave, stick, and rock, very land connected terms, but walk you through a guided sharing circle. And I think this is really important. And I would end each session with this guided sharing circle as well. And finally, here are my references. Thank you for watching.